Hello and welcome to the Room of Lives. I'm your host Neil, and today we are joined by Ian Benouis. Ian was a Blackhawk helicopter pilot in Operation Just Cause in Panama in 1989, which was part of the war on drugs. After the war, Ian joined pharmaceutical giant Pfizer and witnessed firsthand the rise of synthetic opioids and SSRI-based meds for treating anxiety and PTSD. In the years since, Ian has been healing himself and other veterans of trauma using plant-based medicines and psychedelics of Latin American origin. In the previous two sections, Ian gave a broad overview of his experiences and his work, and we talked about war, trauma, the pharmaceutical industry, and drug policy. In this concluding section, I first asked Ian about healing using plant medicines and practices. We discussed the path of psychedelics as compared with the path of spiritual practice, and about the idea of nirvana that these paths supposedly lead to. In the context of healing and rehabilitation, we talk about eating right and exercise, and Ian shares with us his spiritual practice and his habits of eating and physical activity, before sharing some general advice on living well. Then we dive headlong into the curious world that psychedelics open up. What have they revealed about the nature of life and reality? Is the world separate at all from ourselves? Are we separate from each other? Is life a kind of illusion or dream? Do we die? At the very end, I ask Ian for guidance and advice as a student seeking to bridge the gap between spirituality and science through psychedelics research, and then some advice for life in general. Okay, so this second part, I'm calling it healing using plant medicines and practices. In the first part, we talked mostly about war and trauma and the manner in which traditional medicines have been unhelpful. So here we'll talk about using plant medicines and practices. Once again,
which are previous traditional,
Yeah.
Right? They're just traditional beforehand.
Yeah. And once again, the questions are going to be the extra questions that I have that were not covered in the Molotov seminar. So you mentioned at some point that it's generally understood that 10% of the shamans are legitimate. It's a rough number.
Yeah.
So my question is, what kind of stuff are the rest up to?
Whew. I guess the same ego games a lot of us, which are attacking other shamans that they see as more, successful or higher level, whatever. So playing ego games with other shamans, but obviously the biggest one is either not being qualified and or having negative intentions towards the people that they're serving. So, not creating a safe and sacred container, not giving people appropriate medicines, or giving people medicines that are not appropriate because of the other medications that they're on, that are contraindicated. So, it can be intentional ill will, out of greediness. It can be just lack of care and concern. So just basically people that aren't humble and don't have the training and not doing it for the right reasons, and are doing it primarily for the money.
Yeah.
So
see. Yeah. During the Molotov seminar, you mentioned that the psychedelic plant medicine that you're taking is not. It's one way that it's unlike the prescribed SSRIs and opioids is that these are not maintenance drugs. But then a friend of mine called Stefan asked the question. He said, well, if that is the case, and you're also saying that you did ayahuasca 54 times last year, or maybe in your life
in the past couple years.
In the past couple years. So he posed this question, and you answered that question, but you said something when you were answering that I'm curious about. You said, there's no end to uncovering the layers as you go and do these medicines every new time. So my blunt question to you is, what about the idea of enlightenment or nirvana?
What about the idea? What about it?
Well, I would say that from my current understanding, which is impoverished, of the idea of enlightenment, that's the end of uncovering the layers.
Sure, I think it's more that you can have a temporary experience of being full of light, but that doesn't keep you enlightened unless you practice, like we talked about before, that crystal, taking that light in and shining that light out. Yeah. So, it's not, I mean, they used to say kind of back in the 60s, when you get the message, hang up the phone. Yeah. And it's legit. It's basically saying, hey, if you're, you should be using, well, no, it should be, there you go. You can use these medicines to help work on yourself, but sort of if you finish the work, you don't need to keep on going back for more. But I think the bigger thing is that the work keeps on going, even let's say after you focus on the traumas, there's different layers, more layers to understanding what that means and understanding who you are and how you fit into the cosmos. But definitely if the medicines, they're not, it's not a requirement. If people have taken one of these medicines once or a couple times and they're, for the foreseeable future for themselves, they're set. They're good to go. So again, the medicines they can take you to a state, but that's different than a station. The state is potentially temporary, potentially less fixed versus a station where you're like, okay, so these monks someone might say that they're enlightened or whatever, they've gone over time, right? Station, they're moving slowly to get from one, through the stations, through this path, but they may have an enlightenment that takes them to a place that's at a very high station, but it's only temporarily. So they're in that state, right, and then they come back out of it. And even if it were the case where you did reach or achieve temporarily some kind of enlightenment or liberation, my perspective on it would still be like the kind of bodhisattva perspective. If you're that great, the ultimate message from there is, hey, go back and help other people. Turn that higher level understanding into compassion for your fellow creatures. So so irrespective of whether you can get to enlightenment or become enlightened, it's all, to me, somewhat moot in that the goal is to be in service to yourself and others, right? Your highest self. And so if you're doing that for the medicine, I think that's fine. And, you'll know whether you need more or not. Yeah. I think the bigger thing would be kind of a question maybe around how do you, and this kind of came up in the seminar as well, which is sort of how do you know when to go back to the medicine? And I answer that more around, or what I can't remember what I said, but it's more that it's not how do you know when to go back to medicine, or maybe you shouldn't go back to the medicine if it's a snow globe and you've shaken it up and now you've reconstituted yourself. If it's still swirling around in there, it's not a good time to take the medicine. Otherwise, you're just keeping it swirling so you never have to identify with any who you are. You're just like, I don't know, man, it's all up for grabs. Yeah. So,
a lot of spiritual traditions take decades and lifetimes to reach realizations that can be revealed in minutes by psychedelics sometimes. So I've mentioned earlier to you how I am suspicious of shortcuts when it comes to the mind. So do you have something to sort of reflect on this concern of mine when it comes to this
I think there are two different ways to do the same thing. They're both mindfulness practices that help down-regulate the ego. The power and utility of the slow meditation practice, spiritual practice, daily practice is that it is very slow, but it's also very cumulative, and it also does a really good job in general of preserving the work that's been laid down before, right? So you're you're building this huge edifice, just one brick at a time. So a storm doesn't come along and that's set up and blow away all your bricks. You just keep on laying them down. But it takes a long time. And as you said, it may take, from your perspective, lifetime. So Whereas in psychedelics, on the other hand, the jokes are things like 15 years of therapy in 15 minutes, or however many years of therapy in your ayahuasca session. And so psychedelics are a greater catalyst in that they have a more temporary and intense power, right, of this experience that can be deeper, but it also means it can be harder to hold, right? Mm-hmm. Harder to integrate, and your experience is only good to whatever degree you can integrate that into your life, right? If you can't take those things and make your life more functional, it kind of really ends up defeating the purpose. So now I'm trying to remember where I was trying to go with that.
I was asking about. I didn't really ask you. I just said that I'm kind of suspicious when it comes to shortcuts.
So I think those work together best. They work best combined together.
Yeah,
having a continual, simple, incremental, solid, spiritual practice, and then you can take those revelations and deep processing experiences on the medicines and put them into that spiritual container to integrate them, to protect them, to preserve them, to utilize them. So that's what I found for myself, having a daily spiritual practice and doing yoga and knowing how to do meditation, having all those things made it easier to do the processing I was getting from these really deep dives in psychedelics, where you're releasing trauma and you're understanding how you fit in relation to your family and other people, and you're getting cosmic downloads, and you're like, holy crap, I'm nuts, I've totally lost my mooring and everything. But having those daily spiritual practices and a spiritual philosophy and taking care of yourself and self-care all help to ground that stuff and to inculcate it and to integrate it.
So on that same topic, people in the West sometimes are not familiar with these spiritual traditions, but they may undergo traumatic experiences, for example, going to battle. And then they come back, and to them, a healing procedure through psychedelics is much more accessible and immediate than going through a long drawn meditation or spiritual practice. So for the moment, if you imagine someone who goes through this psychedelic path, they're not always shaking the snow globe. So they do it at regular intervals, but they do not complement it with a spiritual practice. In your experience, how would that work or not work?
Yeah, what happens is, and this is of course all generalizing, right? But those people end up having to go back to the medicine sooner to try to get back or reinforce or reconnect or uncover those same lessons or connect the lessons that they were trying to get the first time that they didn't integrate. In the Jewish tradition, it says that your deeds have to be greater than your wisdom. So like, your theory and your intelligence is only so good as it's applied. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
And, you have to translate it into positive action. That's why reintegration or integration is such a big topic of discussion around medicine circles. Is, the goal of the mystical experience, as Houston Smith said, is altered traits, not altered states. So it's not the action movie, it's how does that movie change your life, or it's not the sermon from the minister, it's how does that affect your behavior. So it's not the peak experience or the visuals or the cosmic downloads or even unity consciousness. If you come back and you're an asshole, you're acting like an asshole, what good is that vision or experience? Then it's sort of some kind of, intellectual masturbation.
Yeah, and I'm not some kind of a short-lived entertainment.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not even trying to knock, just the pleasure aspect of it, but ultimately, it's about functionality. I'm very practical. The practical is the spiritual. The spiritual is the practical. So
Yeah.
If you can put it into your life and make improvements from there, then you could go back to the medicine on whatever personal schedule. There's like a triage to it as well. If you're going to kill yourself, like you're saying, you don't have that luxury of doing some kind of long-term spiritual practice, but ideally you'd give someone some opportunity to have some deep releases and revelations on the medicine, and then start to couple that, or simultaneously be coupling that with these other spiritual technologies, breathing and meditation, yoga, whatever, just to help that person hold those things and integrate them, and literally like have the flexibility and to do it. So.
Yeah. You see these drawings? I didn't draw those. The two ones like in black and white. I bought these from an artist who sells his art in the Pike Place Market in Seattle.
Yeah, I've been there.
Yeah, and after I looked through his art, I felt compelled to engage in a conversation with him. And after a couple of minutes, I immediately went into my experience of, I had recently taken LSD the first time. I felt like I wanted to talk to him about this. And I told him what I was surprised by, that there were, very few visuals. And it felt, overall, it was a negative experience for me. And the way that I would sum it up was that it was a philosophical implosion of my head. And so I asked him, why is it that my experience turned out to be so much more different than this huge entertaining thing that I keep hearing about? And he told me something. He said that he and his ex-wife or ex-girlfriend, he noticed, reacted very differently to LSD. He said, when I took LSD, I felt like, what he did was he went and he communicated with a tree in his backyard for hours. Whereas his ex-wife who did it, she ingested it and she immediately went downtown out to party. And he felt like he was unable to, it was impossible for him to do the same. He was just compelled to connect with. And so I'm remembering this now because I've seen several other examples of when the drug that's being given to the person is the same, but the way in which they relate to that experience or what experience they have is very different. And there's a certain category of experiences that ends up changing you or motivating you to be different or move in a different way once you are off the drug again. And the other category is just viewed as this entertainment that you can just go back to and entertain yourself again. But then when the drug goes away, you're kind of back to being almost the same person that you were before, and nothing really percolated. So I mean, it's just kind of, I was just reminded of this when you were talking about.
I recently attended a meetup about ketamine put on locally here in town by a doctor and his wife who are giving people ketamine treatments. And there was a gentleman in there that asked a question. It'll be just a great example of this. Of course, I won't say his name, but this gentleman said, I'd been to get some ketamine treatments from this other provider here in town, and they were really amazing. It was really helpful. And the benefits lasted for about 3 months, and then they kind of went away. And so his question to this other doctor was, how much does your stuff cost? How does it work? It was all about the sort of mechanics of it, of getting this thing of purchasing this commodity, this service. And so he got those questions answered. Then after, when we're meeting some of the people that were there, I was talking to that same gentleman, and I asked him, do you want to know how to not have to go back and take more medicine? And he looked at me like, what? And I said, yeah, do you want me to tell you? And he's like, sure. And I said, oh, so when you took that medicine the first time and you got all that information about yourself, cosmic downloads, personal, biographical, whatever, you have to integrate those lessons into your life and make those changes, right? In a positive way. You have to schematically dismember yourself before you can remember yourself, before you can put yourself back together. But basically that you have to do the work, and the only way is through. And he goes, no, you don't understand. So you have this genetic condition. And I just said, science doesn't back up the idea that some genetic condition gives you some disease. I said it's 1% genetics and 99% lifestyle. Plus, we're learning about epigenetics, and it's all about the activation of the proteins. It's not just about your genetic code. But he's put this, and
he has this narrative that relieves him of his responsibility.
Exactly, makes him a victim, and the medical profession, as I said up here, loves that. They put, you've got this syndrome, this disease, therefore you're screwed. I said, that's totally making Source out to be cruel. Built this beautiful biovehicle, and they said, no, you have this thing, so you're defective. We have to send them all back to the factory, and but. He didn't really want to hear that. You said, his narrative was, I'm a victim. It's somebody else's fault. I'm disempowered, and I want somebody to give me medicine and not have to do any work, and it'll make it go away. And then I'll come back and take some more. Yeah. But and that in one way can work, right? But that's nowhere as efficient as the goal of the medicine. I figured out very early on. Was to feel the effects for the medicine as long as you can while you're not on the medicine. It's as simple as that. And it's not a good, bad, being the, it's just, that's the whole goal. Yeah. So because then everything on some level is a maintenance drug. Once in a lifetime, once a year. Whatever it turns out to be. But you want to have the medicine do the work so that you feel good also when you're not on it.
Can you tell me in a bit more detail what your spiritual practice consists of?
Sure. I've been practicing Islam for 25 years so. And that's like my daily spiritual practice, right? Praying multiple times a day, which is ultimately like from an external perspective, a mindfulness practice, a meditation, a connection with Source. And I learned how to meditate with Brahma Kumar's NGO here in Austin, Texas. Open-eyed, third-eye meditation. I've been doing yoga for 7 or 8 years, and hopefully I'll try to do it if I can, 5 days a week. So, those they all tie together, and they're all synergistic. And I've done lots of awesome processing and personal reflection and whatnot in yoga class from things that I processed under medicine. I sometimes feel like I'm cheating or I'm getting away with something because I'm in class and I'm like, oh man, I'm doing all this processing, or I'm just reconnecting and reactivating to other things in a more controlled, positive way. So I feel like I'm having fun. So
I want to talk a little bit more about a few other, being healing and wellness principles, not directly to do with psychedelics. So we talked about the spiritual practice. You mentioned once that if you have not been eating right, the ayahuasca medicine is going to kick your ass. So so the question that I want to ask you is, what are the kinds of eating habits that you follow in general in life, both in an inclusive and an exclusive sense? What is it that you pay attention to eat, and what is it that you pay attention to not eat?
So, as part of a standard diet for drinking ayahuasca, one would be restricted from eating lots of processed foods, right, that have lots of preservatives and salt and anything that's like super refined and less natural, where it's your body burns it faster, right, and doesn't slowly metabolize, and so it just gets your body going in these huge swings of neurohormones and neurotransmitters. And so I think I was a vegetarian for 5 years, and that process made me a more conscious eater, but I eat meat now, and ayahuasca just really turned up my sensitivity on clean eating, realizing that I'm a superorganism, and even within that I have these different body parts. So I've got all the serotonin being produced in my gut, and realizing that if my gut is happy, then my vagus nerve, right, that sends this information up to my brain, is happy, and then I'm happy. So then you're starting to eat and think about, hey, what are all the yeast and bacteria in my digestive system to think about this food I'm about to eat? And, if you can imagine them going, woohoo, yay, or like, oh my God, I have to, eat all that crap.
Yeah.
So, just really not a kind of, like we're talking about the drugs, allowing this and banning that and putting things in categories. It's just, so if I want to eat ice cream, which, it's not too often, but I eat ice cream. If I want to eat a piece of pizza and really enjoy those things, but just eating less processed, less refined, more whole, more natural foods. And I gave up alcohol. It's part of my spiritual practice a long time ago, and that certainly just makes everything a lot easier. But gosh, I don't drink sodas anymore. And that's just eventually went away. And gosh, but if I wanted to have Cheetos, I would eat some Cheetos. But I don't eat Cheetos every day, And I definitely drink kombucha. I brew my own kombucha, and it's the understanding the whole like probiotics and yeast and bacteria fermentation or breakdown is all a way of like it's another way of digesting your food. You can cook it, you can ferment it, and natural fermentation is a really healthy thing to have in your diet to have a proper balanced microbiome. So I guess just I would say more understanding like your overall health and how you fit in the system, and how we can't factory farm and eat all this meat and not be destroying the planet and causing, climate change as a result. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if that kind of, answers the question overall, but it's the medicine maybe allows you to see more into just the whole over ecosystem and see how you work, and just you just want to feel better and be more in line with the environment, but it's not like people are going to do that and then all of a sudden, I don't know. Start having crazy diets. Some people will, but
And what about what's your take on the role of exercise?
Yeah, I think that that's called getting high in your own supply. I taught my kids that, right? To make yourself feel good through physical exercise. And they've shown now it's when they call it an endorphin high, endogenous morphines. It's really more of an endocannabinoid high, that the endocannabinoid system then triggers the release of 5 different endorphins, endogenous morphines. So it's like if you do yoga or any kind of stretch, and you push and then you release, that's an endogenous morphine. You can feel it. You're like, oh, like you let go, right? So the release, and then you get the little morphine, little boost from the fact that you pushed. You didn't tear, right? But you just push, and that's what's happening. So, I explained to my kids. I said, okay, we were playing on the trampoline in the backyard. We do that for hours, and we just get high, just bouncing around the trampoline. And I said, one day, you guys feel really good. And they're like, oh yeah. I said, this is called getting high on your own supply, and it's like making yourself feel good with your own brain chemicals. And you want to do that. You want to eat well, have good social relations, You want to exercise because then you will feel good naturally, and you won't have to take something else because you feel bad to make yourself feel better. You already feel good, and then if anything, you're at least supplementing, and that's a different ball game from like I suck, I'm depressed, I'm whatever, and I don't even have that trying to take something to fix it. If you're like, I feel pretty good, then you might be able to go like, wow, how can I feel better? Well, maybe you'll think I should, run another couple miles or do any other kind of exercise or yoga or whatever. Yeah. So, I think those are just all natural ways of making yourself feel good. And you should have as many of those accessible to you. Like we're talking about these other technologies, they all fit together.
Yeah.
So,
I can't point out explicitly what caused what, but since I started my own meditation practice, I find that the diet and exercise parts of my life have improved as well. I exercise regularly. I didn't tell you what my general dietary principles are, but they align very much with, lower meat, less meat, less processed food, And I now have built a kind of intuition for just looking at a piece of food and knowing what's good and what's not good.
Yeah.
With my tongue, I can kind of taste, this is kind of healthy, this is not.
Yeah.
Whereas in the past, it used to be this, what is this whole food science about? It's so confusing. But at some point, we kind of grow an intuition for it. Yeah.
Plus, right, you literally have like 3 brains. You have our one on top, and you have a heart brain that's got 10,000 neurons in it. And you have a stomach brain that has the number of neurons of a cat brain. And you produce all the serotonin here. So all these clues we have about trusting your gut and your intuition, there's something to that. And if anything, you could argue this is a big brain to be an omnivore, right? To figure out just mainly what we put in there. So it would make sense to listen to your gut. And I know in my gut, it's like, dude, 2 sodas makes your stomach hurt from all the sugar in it. That's literally your stomach going like, that's not necessarily the best setup for you. So we've outsourced a lot of our own intuition on the altar of scientific rationality. I mean, scientific rationality is great, but it's sort of like, now we're going to let the experts tell us eggs are good. No, eggs are bad. Wait, they're good again. Fat is, what is, fat's bad, sugar's bad. I can't even keep track of what's technically bad anymore. So,
when I was a kid, sugar was good, fat was bad. Now it's the opposite.
Now it's the opposite.
So beyond diet and exercise, this is not just for myself or anyone listening in. Do you have any other general recommendations for living better?
Well, I think we're social creatures, so we need social contact. We're living in an era where we have more potential connection than ever, but people can feel more disconnected, and the technologies can even reinforce it. So it's having those connections, but making it also sure that you get out and connect with other people in live and real time, and not just sit at home and have Amazon, Uber Eats or whatever people do send you stuff all day. So we are social creatures, and we function best in that way. So having social network support system, having things in the dimension of exercise where you can exert yourself and just relieve tension, right? We know. And you can do that through Tai Chi. It doesn't have to be boxing or football or whatever. But just ways to move and release energy. And so yoga, meditation, and there's all these other fun technologies that are coming online, light therapy and flotation tanks. And I guess now those are starting to get a little bit more into sort of maybe health or therapeutic side, but body work. I just think any technologies of self-care can be potentially useful. And I think a lot more through technology or even coming online. But if I talked more about other technologies, they'd probably be more about specifically helping people around trauma. Whether, like EMDR or others like desensitization therapy or using virtual reality for PTSD. But just in the more daily living, I think it's the more classic technologies that that have been around for a long time. Adding in some new cool technological ones. Walking, I mean, I know if I could get walking in my program, I would be set between a little bit of soccer, yoga, and getting some meditation separately from that, and then yoga. And then if I could find a way for myself to walk, like I was in New York, I was in San Francisco the other day, just a couple of days ago, and just we walked for an hour or even more, and it was like that was all the exercise you needed for one day. And so.
Okay. Now I want to ask you some questions. This is going to be the part of the conversation that is most exciting to me, potentially. So I'm going to be asking you about the insights into the nature of life or reality that you experience. So let's start off with, have you had experiences? I bet you have had, but could you describe the non-dual or the non-duality of the experiences that you have had, either on psychedelics or off? If you could just briefly describe.
Well, let's maybe talk about a little bit what that can mean. So, because I always joke in these definitions, it's really great and it's fun to talk about this stuff, but it's like, why is non-dual not like non-triple or non-quad? Or it's kind of funny to even call something non-dual, but to me that's unity consciousness, and that is a state. I think God's the only one in that station right now. We're all accessible to that station, but in a different state. And that's really having the ego completely downregulated, right? Where you experience unity consciousness. And I have personally had those experiences predominantly through 5-MeO-DMT, the active ingredient in the secretion of the bufo alvarius, the Sonoran desert toad. And for pretty much common consensus, that medicine seems to downregulate the ego more than anything else, and through that allow someone to be in a non-dual unity consciousness state. And so maybe I'll reference the first time that, really I could say the first time that happened to me. I initiated myself with this 5-MeO-DMT medicine, over 20 years ago, but did it once and came back to it a couple years ago. Both times I kind of whited out, so it was sort of like a bungee jumping experience where I didn't see a reason to repeat it. But also not really so much at that point then knowing what I was doing or another community of people that were working with it. And I had the chance to be invited to Crossroads Treatment Center. I'd done ayahuasca over a 3-day weekend. Then 2 weeks later, I went down to Mexico to do ibogaine and 5-MeO-DMT, the toad secretion in Tijuana and Rosarita. And then I went to do Peru, where the Soldiers of the Vine, a week later. And so that was my first toad experience where I didn't actually have unity consciousness, non-dual, because whether my soul tried to leave my body by going outside or inside, however it was oriented, my ego threw up like a rope or a net, and literally, or like that's how I experienced it, metaphorically or conceptually. And my ego got involved, and I couldn't turn it off, and I took more medicine, and it was just had too much of a stranglehold. Then when I took the veterans back after Peru a couple months later to Mexico to do the ibogaine and the toad, I didn't do the ibogaine the second time, but I did the toad again. And this time I felt for myself that I was ready to try to let go. And I remember doing, kind of pranayama, yogic breathing techniques to relax myself and really get my ego to, after like one dose of the medicine, kind of off to the side. It kind of just sort of left my body and hung out there next to me while this was going on. And I was able to then take more medicine and let go, and to find out what there was beyond my letting go of that ego. And when I did that, I can't even say that I went to a place or that I was in a place. It's just more the time and space disappeared. My perspective of Ian disappeared. My egos was not in the equation. My even like soul, my individual soul, that didn't exist. But I still had the perspective. There was a perspective that was still there, except that it was the perspective of the Godhead, and in that perspective, it was everything. It was energy, so it couldn't be created or destroyed. It was infinite love. It was eternity. It was forever. And it was all, and it was infinity in all directions and all dimensions. And still in my conception of it, right, of my perspective, I was at the center of it, but at the same time, I was the whole thing. Like this sort of Alex Gray painting or something, where it went in all directions, and being from and existing from this perspective where I was everything. But I knew that I was an energy then, and I couldn't be created or destroyed. I could only be transmuted. So I was like, well, death is not a thing. And I said, is this all there is? Because that's right, the vantage point or perspective of the whole thing. And in my trying to find out, let go to find out what source is, source told me in my body when I asked that question, is this all there is? Source basically says, I let go to create creation. Like it was an act of it letting go to do this. I'm like letting go to find out what it is, and it like kind of turned the Moebius strip or the infinity loop right back on me. And my immediate reaction to that was just complete gratitude. You know, I was like crying and saying thank you. So, and since then I've had experiences going back into that state, temporarily into that state. And, it's a state where you can be in a non-dual state temporarily and experience the unity consciousness where you're the wave having a particle experience, and you, in that time, have a wave experience. And when you're the wave, you're the whole thing, and there's no lack. This is what holistic really means. You're the whole, and when you're the whole, you don't lack or want for anything. So you're not even healing, or you're it's healed because right, everything's connected up. So that's and then
and maybe in some sense there never was any problem.
Well, I think that's the there's only problem because of the viewpoint of separation. Exactly, and that's what makes this game, right? That's what makes this.
So here's a little funny story about myself. One of the things that kind of triggered several years back a sort of renewed search in my own life for spirituality was a book that I read that was written by Sam Harris called Waking Up, A Guide to Spirituality Without Religion. And I was working in a field of neuroscience at that time. And one of his big thrusts in the book was about the idea of non-duality, and saying how current day neuroscientific findings are actually in alignment with this ancient spiritual idea of there being the separation between the subject and object of experience being illusory. So in the beginning, I just had this very strong intellectual fascination for this idea. And so for a long time, months to maybe a year, I was inside me, there was this burning desire to experience it. Like I was hunting out everything, all resources, all sorts of ways to like, non-duality was like my holy grail. If I found someone who could say a word about it, I was like, okay, how do I, it's kind of funny, right? So the one time that I did shrooms, when I told you that I had compassion for Donald Trump, I remember writing down some notes. I was just here in this room. And funnily, what I saw later on after I came back from the trip is I had written down, this experience is non-dual, but it doesn't matter. All that matters is love.
Oh, wow.
And so it's not like that it doesn't matter.
The true
but
secret.
It doesn't matter in the way that I was seeking it. Like it was going to give me something. Like it's kind of paradoxical in the way that I was looking as this concentrated subject. I was looking for this object that was non-duality. So it's just
only when you give a gift out of unconditional love, it's not some sort of energetic transaction, do you create something out of nothing. So well, that's amazing that you were captured by that, and then we're seeking to,
because it was my intellectual mind that connected with this first, and was this intellectual curiosity, because it made sense in like neuroscience terms. So that's kind of the first bridge that it laid between my intellectually curious mind and the spiritual mind. But then at some point, when more of the insight was revealed, I kind of like, even the intellectual curiosity I can kind of lay to rest right now, because there's more fulfillment here.
It's the further layers of the onion, right? And I think that we're at a time finally where science and religion, metaphysics, however you want to look at it, can speak the same language. Then we're getting to finally have some useful dialogues. In the past, you kind of had to rely on faith and belief, and some people would hide under that, or not do their homework, right? And that's a shortcut. But now, like you said, you could look at the science and go, well, non-dual seems to be more the nature of the universe, and then you could say, well, those spiritual people who've been saying that for a long time, they must know what they're talking about, and there must be something to some of these spiritual technologies that they're implementing, and yeah. So.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk for a moment about the notion of free will. In your experiences, whether on psychedelics or otherwise, have you ever experienced the vanishing of, like, that there was no free will?
That's a great question. The first time I did 5-MeO-DMT, when I initiated myself, back when it was legal, in Austin, Texas, and you could buy it on the internet from JLF Poisonous Non-Consumables. And I remember taking it, and the word I could only, like a breadcrumb that I could remember, so, like, concept, word, whatever, sublimated. I just, I talked before about like time and space disappearing or whatever. Some people might experience it as like a going backwards to the Big Bang. For me, it just like sublimated. And I remember coming out of that and going, what just happened to my free will? Because I let go, but it was like, I just got over surrendered. And so I think free will is one of the most fun topics to discuss these days, because I can't say anything definitive on it. On one level, right, we starting to know from quantum physics and everything, right, that the thing you think you thought of and the action that you're trying to do is already actually happening right in fact, the past.
There are some experiments that were done on humans in the I think around 1962 by a neuroscientist called Benjamin Libet, that actually Sam Harris mentions in his book, that poked a huge hole in the idea of free will, because the experimenters, they asked the participant to make some very simple choice, but they could predict from looking at blood flow in their brain. They could predict before the participant knew what choice they were going to make. The experimenters knew what was going to happen. So what Sam Harris pointed out in his book was that there is a connection here between the idea of non-duality, which is, okay, there is no separate self. And if there is no separate self, where would free will come from? And so that's one of the things that kind of intrigued me a lot. So I want to ask you, you definitely have had some episodes where this free will notion kind of dissolved or disappeared.
Yeah, exactly. At least from a temporary perspective.
Yeah. But the rest of the time you feel like, okay, there's free will. I have chosen today to come to Neil's podcast. And
that's the interesting thing. And there's these. It's a dance, and it's more of a continuum. And you can argue maybe something I've been thinking about could be, let's say, an extension of like an idea that Michael Pollan's put out in an earlier book called The Botany of Desire, where he says, okay, as humans, we think that we're the ones that are moving these plants around. And we're getting them to do what we want, whether it's cannabis or corn or tulips or potato or apples that he talks about. But, maybe corn is making us do stuff. There's more corn grown than other plant on the planet, so who's in charge of who? Is the corn in charge of us? So on one level you can say, there's no free will, because it's all one big process. It's all connected. And so I'm just responding to my environment.
Yeah.
I'm like a helicopter pilot holding the stick, and if it blows this way, I move the stick to compensate. And if it blows that way, you know what I mean? And I'm just really, that's all I'm doing is sitting here, but wow, I'm drawing this unique pattern, right? But it's actually all in response to...
That's a really good way to put it.
Yeah, just thinking about it, because I've been listening to Alan Watts since I was flying back on the plane and just talking about the interplay and interpenetration of the whole thing, right? That you can't have one without the other, so it's really a space-time continuum. And the best picture I have for myself today is, it's like an ant farm, right?
Yeah.
Water flows down through this thing, and it can make choices about going right or left or going this way, whatever, but it still goes through gravity down to the bottom. Yeah. So it's that sort of thing where you got the attractor of gravity, and there is some co-creation to it, right? But it's ultimately determined by that environment. And it all ends up at the same place anyway. So whether it goes left or right, the drop chooses left or right, the water still ends up down at the bottom.
Yeah.
So you do have these right? You have these greater things, like you have the gravity to the story. It's, what I mean? And all water's going to go to the lowest point. So.
The physicists would come in and say that the apparent unpredictability or uniqueness to, okay, so if you start with one drop, you don't know exactly which path it's going to take. It may look unpredictable to us.
Yes, exactly.
But all the laws of nature are in there that from the very beginning determined which way that even
the wind, the electromagnetic energy, the magnetism, the gravity.
And if you could take all of that into account, you would see that there is no non-determinacy to even the path of every drop. But what has limited us, this is really true, when it comes to what are called non-linear systems like that, systems that look kind of complicated, but it's because it's hard for humans to predict, given our limited knowledge.
So we think,
but it doesn't mean that there's intrinsic
because we don't know what's going on. We think it's free will.
The
monkeys are buying into the illusion.
So, I mean, I was thinking about the connection between some of the principles and challenges that have been found by scientists in the material world and parallels that can be drawn about, the psychological world or the world of humans or the ways in which the mind interacts with the universe. And I feel like there might be more than superficial. A lot of scientists will kind of dismiss the connections. Don't bring this quantum stuff into your woo-woo because it's just, but I feel I'm starting to sense that there may be like deeper connections. I'm not going to be very explicit because my mind has not been made up, but I feel like sometimes the universe tries to play a little game where it like shows you an example of a principle in like the material world, but it's kind of pointing at that being mirrored in like the non-material.
Absolutely, because ultimately the universe is some kind of mirror for the divine, for which it to see itself through expressing itself through that. So creation would mirror the divine. You would see a same pattern. That's really what we're trying to do, is we're trying to see the pattern of source, which is to us invisible, through the material world, right? But it's not it's the pattern that's underneath that we're trying to see through the material world. But that those two interplays, you can't have a creation without a creator, and you can't have a creator without a creation, because that title goes away anyway, at least, right? You're just like a non-creator.
Just last night we were talking about, so the traditional scientific idea is kind of, or at least the contemporary idea is that everything is kind of materialism, that the mind has been given, has arisen from a materialistic universe. So the materialistic universe is seen to be the source, and the biological mind is supposed to be a product. Whereas I had a friend sitting here who had read this book called like Biocentrism or something like that, where it was like arguing that in fact the opposite is true, where consciousness is the originator of everything and the universe is given birth. And I was sitting here kind of trying to square the two sides and say, both are true, because without the mind you don't have the experience of the universe, at least. So now, what are we having? We're sitting down. Definitely something is happening. We're having an experience. I'm sitting in a room. There are lights, blue, green, whatever. A person is sitting in front of me. I can hear sound. That is the only undeniable truth about what I experience. Everything else is conjecture and hypothesis. And the only way that this undeniable reality or experience can happen is that it requires both things. It requires object, it requires the universe, and it requires a mind. If you had a universe without a conscious mind, which physicists sometimes like to think about, there would not be this experience.
If the tree
if you had only
there's
consciousness,
no conscious mind, there's no person to hear.
If you had only consciousness but no creation, you wouldn't have this experience either. So it's in this collision of the apparently separate mind and the universe that there is anything at all. So and in that there's both sides are true, but
they're both interconnected. You can't draw a line or a cut between the two.
And the moment you cut a line, that's when you start worrying about this fallacious question of what came first. Was it the universe that came first and then the biological mind, or was it the mind that came first and then the universe was created? If the two are really the same, that there's a Zen koan that says, what is the sound of one hand clapping?
I thought we knew from Bart Simpson. It's that.
It doesn't make a lot of sound.
It's true. It's more like a squishing.
True. Okay, so now we're kind of coming to the point where I ask you like the ultimate question, but we have we have been talking about
and
this.
And then Ian's like, "Have I studied for this? Was this?"
Yeah. Well, before you gave the Molotov seminar, we met at Taco Joint, and even in that like brief 10-minute, 20, maybe half-hour conversation, we exchanged notes on the nature of reality. And I remember you telling me this idea of the creator willfully hiding and then seeking. We have touched on various aspects of this idea, but if you could please sort of, mostly for our listeners, give a sort of account, the best account that you can sort of... I mean, I know that it's such an abstract and such,
Why are we here?
An account of what is the nature of reality, no matter how like weird it might sound.
Well, then, I would just say, like, what's my working theory for myself, for my own personal...
Yeah.
I would say, that Source, in an act of love, chose to forget itself into matter as a way to play, and I use game in the word of like to have an experience, to have a space-time field on which to separate itself and in that act forget itself, to then remember itself and connect back more to itself. That creates more love. That creates, and we're like these little quantum computers. Consciousness is really conscious choice, and we can choose more love, and that's the whole game. How do we choose more love at every... So many things that are hiding in plain sight, and it seems from what we can see that Source spoke or sung the universe, the one song, into existence, and sound manipulated electromagnetic energy, light. Let there be light into a form, held up, pounded by things like, dark matter, the maybe scaffolding, and then dark energy, a force to somehow balance out gravity to, for us to have a temporal experience in this transit of this phase, but this whole thing goes on forever, and we're in the present moment of eternity all the time. So, I think that's the current model that I'm working off of, and that's the fun part about waking up and realizing the true secret is that you're the animating force that creates that's life in you is the source of everything. It's your essential reality. So I'm having fun as these medicine worlds and spiritual metaphysics and religion and science and technology all kind of come together, and everyone starts talking about the same language, which is like Source surrendered to love itself, centered to itself, and forgot itself so it could remember itself. This is like a big waking up and remembering. And it's pretty awesome. So I'm glad Source chose to do this. Because like if you're unlimited, this is what we talked about that one night here after the Molotov seminar, staying up late talking about the universe as a simulation. Is if you're unlimited, how do you explore yourself except through limitation? And when you're a little kid, you want to be magic and do everything in a game, but then you realize it's no fun because you can do everything. There's no challenge, there's no drama, there's no engagement, there's no up and down, back and forth, and so you want to have some kind of superpowers, but not unlimited. And that's why consciousness is conscious choice, and then it's a set of... Source could have chose, I created this game, the simulation, I don't like it. I'm not going to wait 13.8 billion years. I'm just going to hit the reboot button. So there's a certain promise, and then certain religions have a perspective, that there's a promise even that Source made to say, I'm going to let this thing go on for a certain amount of time before there's next transformation or transmutation or whatever. So,
Benam and I actually sat down here for a 2-part, total of 6-hour long podcast that was titled "Is Life a Simulation?" Where my ultimate sort of sly purpose was to arrive at topics like this, but I tried to kind of sneak it in there. I first started talking about the modern technological notions of simulation. Human beings are coming up with better and better simulations. There's this thing called the simulation theory floating around where, life might be a simulation. Yeah. So I started from a technological perspective that would be easy for people, listeners to digest. And then I started making it more and more plausible that the kind of simulation that we find ourselves compelled to enter might already have happened, and you might have, and what would be the properties of such a simulation? Sure. You want it to become more and more realistic and lifelike. You see VR is, and then at some point you were like, okay, I want to have actually higher stakes. So maybe I want this computer feedback mechanism to give me little shocks of pain when I do the wrong thing. Okay, but not really
sounds
kill
more
me.
And more like life.
Yeah, okay. And then the next thing is, I can't keep remembering that I'm this person playing a game so I have to temporarily suspend my memory and identity before I entered the game.
Reboot.
Yeah. The other thing that
words.
that could happen is, if I'm the only creator of the simulation, then it would be fun for me to divide my consciousness, my interaction with this machine up into multiple characters of the game and all playing each other at the same time. It would be diminished versions of my consciousness because I'm just this one brain divided up into 100 characters. But it would be kind of fun. It would be this apparent separation where I'm like playing with myself essentially, like different. So
and now, so the next conversation we have to get the medicine part and the spirituality and the science, and then the video game developers to talk like about the story part, right? Like
yeah. And there could be little Easter eggs in the game where I'll put this frog in here. Yeah. And then there will be like pineal gland. You go and take that, and suddenly you're going to be a little bit more knowledgeable about what
conscious. Yeah. Well, I think breadcrumbs, little hidden cheat codes or whatever you like. Yeah.
I keep talking about it so much that it annoys Benouis sometimes. Like, oh man, here he goes again about like his life is a simulation theory. But, I mean, I have fun. Okay, so now...
Well, I'll just say the life is a simulation from the standpoint of it has temporality in time and space, so it's not forever. We look at a mountain and go, look at that mountain, but it's actually been changing, right? That's the point. So it is a simulation in that even though we're in eternity, spirit is eternal, but material is temporal. So.
Yeah.
Which gives it even more value because it's not forever, so we should cherish it, but not get over attached to it.
So, in the light of this understanding, how do you view death?
I don't believe there is death ultimately, from the standpoint of it's just energy cannot be created nor destroyed, right? First law of thermodynamics, and the part of us that is energy, which is just another word for spirit, can't be created or destroyed. So there's no death, there's just transformation and transmutation. And I think that's first step on moving towards a state or experience of liberation or enlightenment is getting rid of the fear of death and then working your way up the chakras to you get to the point where you're aligned with your true nature, which is unity consciousness, which is love. And so getting over your fear of death is the first step in that.
Yeah.
Understand that you're energy and you can't die. So.
Yeah. And what is your view of the so-called thing called enlightenment? What do you think that such a thing?
Well, I think that it's more of a state of enlightenment. It's sort of like just being full of light, and then the goal is to polish that crystal so you can receive more light and put out more light. But to say you're enlightened, or this is like create a barrier or state between. Yeah. Well, we know that we're all biophotonic, right? We actually emit light from our bodies, and so we're light, which is electromagnetic energy, slowed down into matter. And so we already are, beings made of light.
Yeah. Okay, let's put it in a much more
So that's what I'm saying. So it's just like shining more light is being more enlightened.
Yeah,
How's that? You know what I mean? Literally, like
yeah,
all the woo, let your light shine. It's like it's all true. So is that person enlightened? It's not a binary. It's a quantum, right? And it's like, how much light can you shine with your quantum bio vehicle?
So I want to recast this into more personal terms.
Sure.
So in your own...
So I can't hide out behind all these high-tech words.
Yeah. In your own personal perspective, what would you like to improve on or go towards with the rest of your
life?
Our
what? On our...
From your personal perspective, just talking about you now, in what directions would you like to move with the rest of your life? So your personal ideal... of like maybe this exists, maybe this doesn't, the better Ian that you want to be.
Well, yeah, I think those would go to more with authenticity and just we're each a unique creation of DNA and these like sort of divine qualities, right, mixed up in different amounts to make us unique. And just trying to be authentic to my true self, my higher self, my purpose, and none of that's written in stone. That's the part of the work, is figuring that out. Why are you here? What are you passionate about? What do you like to do? How can you have the thing that you like to do be in service to the greater good, so you can do the thing you like or prefer to do or want to do more than other things that also makes you and other people around you better. So and then for me it's okay, so it's radical acceptance of everything that's happened as being perfect. Practicing living in the moment. Complete acceptance to what's coming next, which is that's the fear of death part, which is ultimately a fear of the unknown. And if you know you can't die, what is there to fear? Then it's just all the details. So radical acceptance of everything that's coming, and then just trying to live more in the moment. So you still need to learn from the past and have a plan, some kind of plan for the future, but not spending so much time in the past. That's the definition of depression, is regret about loss in the past. And anxiety is just worry of anticipation of loss in the future. And you can't not learn from the loss in the past or worry about loss, but you need to be living in the present so you can see what's going on around you. So you can make better decisions about where you are and where you're going. And then you'll less think about those other directions. So, and then enjoying the ride, and just... I'm trying to live in a place of, not trying to, again, I'm practicing living in a place of acceptance and trust that this all has a greater pattern to it, a greater purpose, a greater beauty, love that I'm able through my own limited perspective to see. And then the good news is the more I let go, the better it gets.
So I have two final questions for you. You mentioned earlier how this is starting to become the era in which science and spirituality can start to speak the same language. And I personally, one of the reasons I got excited about this Psychedelics conference, and I'm getting excited about the prospect of doing research, is I want to be one of the people who will bridge these two disciplines. I find it resonating very strongly inside me that I want to be that person. One of these people. So what guidance, if any, would you have for like a student such as myself going into this?
I think what you're doing, which is go to some of these events which gather scientists and academicians and clinicians and doctors and enthusiasts and medicine people, where they're talking about the intersection of these things. And and I think it's connecting with other people and sharing perspectives and experiences. So I think the time exists. You and your peers live in a time where the final frontier is the human mind and of course the human heart. But from like a more scientific career, business, money thing, it's the human mind. So understanding that is going to be the key to humans being successful as a species. So I think what I'm saying is you can do that today. You can work in a place where those two things intersect, and get out and talk to other people who are trying to do the same thing, and compare notes and help each other out.
Yeah. Okay, and my final question to you is, in general, well, I'm 29 years old. I consider myself pretty young. You've had a lot more experiences in life than I have. What guidance, if any, would you have in general for a person like me?
Sure. Well, yeah, more like, what have I learned of my years in this on the planet, or this iteration, incarnation, version of the universe? Let's see. The only way is through. So the only way in this work is through. There's no forgetting. There's only remembering and then letting go. It's like, how does God forget part of itself? It has to actually remember it and let go of attachment to something. So it just means, like, it's sort of like in meditation. If you start trying to think, don't think about thoughts, you think thoughts. If you just let them go, then you just acknowledge that they're there, and then you're not stopping them, and you're not even forgetting them, right? You're just letting them go and saying, I'm not attached to them. And so let's see. I've given a lot of those kind of tips and quotes throughout the rest of the talk, but it's maybe just some practical tips. Is that someone like wanting to do maybe these medicines might be what if you want to have a reason that you're going to do the medicine. Some people might say being called the medicine, but it's ultimately like, what's your intention? What's the medicine going to do for you? And then, do you have the physical, mental, spiritual integrity to hold the medicine? Do you have a spiritual practice within, or a mindfulness practice, if you prefer, in which to put it in? Do you have other people in your support network that have experience with that can help you? Do you have these other spiritual technologies of yoga and Tai Chi and body work and acupuncture and flotation, all these other things to support you? And I think it's important to have a spiritual philosophy, to have an outlook, to have a way of organizing the world, whatever. It's a story that you can put those things that you're experiencing in the medicines into. Otherwise, you're just one of those people that you're going to believe everything. And that doesn't, you need discernment. There are differences and divisions in the dual state, which we operate in. So you need to know that ultimately it's unity consciousness, but we have to exist here in the dual state. If I spill that water, it's gonna fall on you. I mean, so it's and underneath it, it's all love. It's infinite. So the best you can, let go and enjoy the ride. And have fun doing it. You still don't want to crash. You want to look stylish and have fun, but enjoy the ride. And that is your personal expression, right? The free will part. How's this? I think maybe this can sort of finish on this for me anyway. Is that my best definition of free will today is lack of resistance in accepting your purpose, your destiny, your authenticity, you're being on the ride. Just let go, and then that's your personal expression. So maybe that's just your face when you're on the surfboard of life, right? That's how, that's, you're right. Everything else is being determined by all the other factors in the system that are determining your behavior and your balance. But I guess you can be there in a surfboard with this big smile on your face, right? Or be like, oh my God, I'm going to crash the whole time. And so it's like, the ride is serious. It has consequences. You can fall over, but if you're going to be doing it, might as well enjoy the ride. So.
Okay. Well, on that note, I guess that's all I had to ask you. And thanks a lot for doing this very long podcast, but
it was awesome.
I enjoyed every minute of it.
Same here.
And to some extent, I'm now a different person than the one who started. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing, right? We're always changing, and there are no boundaries that we can draw in the world of physics between me and you. And my atoms are recycling, and so are yours. So yeah.
Thank you for joining Ian and me today in the Room of Lives. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Take care of yourself and others. Until we meet next time.